I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about a different aspect of this, which is the information about where the public are. Slides. Well, what I'm doing, well, that's coming up. I'll just say, a year ago when we were embarking on this project, I came to the Communicate conference, which was wonderful, and a lot of the people I met then were terrifically helpful at the initial stages of this project, so I'm really pleased to be coming back a year later and presenting some of the findings. The piece of work that we did was commissioned by DEFRA, and it was specifically to support outcome 4 of Biodiversity 2020, which, if you don't remember it, says that by 2020, significantly more people will be engaged in biodiversity issues, aware of its value, and taking positive action. Now, we looked at a number of questions around that, but the one I want to focus on is, one of the questions we really focused on is to say, well, if this is where we want to get to in 2020, then where are we now? Where are we starting from? And how do I make this work? There we go. Where are we starting from? I just wanted the box to come up. We say that we want significantly more people to be engaged in biodiversity issues, so how many people are currently engaged in biodiversity issues? And frankly, while we're at it, what do we mean by that phrase anyway, engaged in biodiversity issues? If I walk out of this building and go up to a random person in the street, how do I work out whether they're engaged in biodiversity issues or how engaged they are? So those are the questions I want to spend just 10 minutes talking about now, and I'll be talking about some of the other issues in the workshop this afternoon. Before I go any further, I do just want to make one caveat about this word engagement, which I think we use a great deal, but I have to say not always with a great deal of precision. My rule of thumb, which I cheerfully break all the time, but my rule of thumb is that whenever we use the word, we should carry on saying in what or with what, because it makes a big difference. Now, I'm aware that many of you have engagement remits which go quite a long way beyond the work that we had here, and particularly this phrase engagement with nature comes up quite a lot as a sort of catch-all for all these things. I'll be completely honest with you, I have no idea what engagement with nature means. I can think of about half a dozen things it could mean, and that's the problem. I don't think it's very well defined. Fortunately, this morning it's not my job to define it. My job is to define engagement with biodiversity issues, and that's the caveat, is that what I'm going to say refers to that specifically. So if you try to apply it beyond that, it won't necessarily work. How did we do this? We used an approach which is called a tiering study. And what did that involve? Well, very simply, we began with a literature review to think about, well, what are the pieces of this term engagement? And no big surprises here. For someone to be engaged, that seems to be saying something about them being aware of the issues, having some kind of concern about those issues, and taking action then to do something about it. I'm not there suggesting, incidentally, any kind of model. I'm not saying awareness plus concern equals action. I don't believe that for a moment. I'm just saying those seem to be the ingredients of engagement. We then designed a questionnaire, a very short and simple questionnaire that we could use for this. And to be honest, if we were doing it again now, we might change it. This is about truth seeking, not truth finding very much. One of the things that we did with that questionnaire was we avoided using the word biodiversity, just so that you know. So we know that there's big issues around that term, but we did have to find some ways of talking about the variety of living things in the world and what was happening to that. Quite long sentences we had to use. They worked okay, and maybe those could be improved. We administered the sample to a representative, a representative sample of 1,000 people in England. It's an England strategy, so I'm sorry this was an England piece of work. I doubt it would be very different in the other nations. And then, crucially, and I want to say a little bit about this, we developed evidence-based decision rules to allocate individuals to tiers. Sorry about the technical bit there, but let me explain what that means. This is not a questionnaire that gives you a kind of an engagement score from 0 to 100. What it does is it very crudely sorts people into one of 5 tiers, and the idea is that tier 1 is not very engaged and tier 5 is very engaged. It's a rough and ready mechanism. It's not perfect, but it's considerably better than what we had when we started the project, and that was really our aim, to give us something in this area. Now, how do you decide which tier a person goes into? Well, we had to develop some rules for that based on their responses, and that was done looking at the responses, how those come together, and also making some pragmatic decisions. And this is important because when you start quoting the results from something like this, from any study, you really do need to go back and look at the questions. I'm sorry, I know it's hard work, and check what the researchers have done. I came across one study which made claims about engagement with nature in this instance. And when I checked what they'd said in their survey to measure engagement with nature, the question was, do you intend to engage with nature in the next week? But if you read the abstract, you would think they were finding some quite robust things about engagement with nature. Have a care with researchers, we can't be trusted. So, we had 4 questions that we put in here. We asked about people, what people thought was happening to the diversity of living things in the world and in the UK. And then we asked them what they anticipated would happen in the future. So we had present, future, world, UK, 4 things there. If we define not aware, we wanted our tier 1 to be people who are not aware of the issue. If we define that as anyone who says, asked what's happening to the variety of living things in England at the moment, they say, I think it's staying the same or even going up, as some people thought it was, then we get 56% of people are not aware of the issue. And for our, that could be a definition of not aware, but for our purposes, that's too many. If we want 5 tiers, we've lost, over half of our group in the first tier. So another definition we could use is we could say, what about if we say anybody who's not aware of any current decrease, either England or in the world? And then we get 48%, and that still was too high for our purposes. So we ended up defining not aware as people who thought, anyone who thought both thought there was no current decrease in the variety of living things in England and the world, and anticipated no decline. And we still got 30% unaware. Now maybe that's the way we asked the question, I don't know. But it's still quite a high number. Bear this in mind when you look at the results from this. You've got to look at the definition. So what did we find? 5 tiers. As I mentioned, the first break that we made was between unaware, as we defined it, and aware. And in that model, we get our first tier, that's 30% who were aware, who, when they were asked what they thought was happening to the variety of living things, they thought it was staying the same, are all going up in the UK and the world, and also I thought that would be the case in the future as well. The next break we made was around an issue we talk about concern. So you can look at the questions, but it was about, for those people who did think there was some kind of decline, is that a problem? Do you care about it? Is it something worth doing something about? And our second tier is the 17% of people who weren't concerned. So that's a sort of an unconcerned group. All of these numbers are in the full report that you can get down, and there's a lot more detail about it, so don't feel you have to scribble stuff down now. Finally, the dimension that we used was one around action. That's our remaining tiers. So we asked lots of questions about what people reported doing. It had to be reports, of course, and looked at that kind of question of action. And lots of discussion, you can imagine, went into which actions we asked about. 25% of the people who said they were aware of the issues and expressed concern but didn't really show any evidence of doing anything. That's the famous value action gap. So that's our 25% in tier 3. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but what we did with the remaining group is we separated out 2 tiers. Tier 4 is doing some stuff, and tier 5 is doing a lot, really. I imagine many of the people in this room are tier 5, so that would put you in 10% of the population. Worth remembering that you're not necessarily very typical. How does this help us? How does it help us? Well, firstly, it gives us, if we're going to start having a strategy target, well, it gives us some kind of sense of, well, what might we use as indicators? What are we actually following? It's not perfect, but better than what we had before, and it clearly linked to the engagement in what. It's linked to the actual thing we're talking about. I think it also helps to start thinking about priorities and setting priorities. For example, in the report, we suggest, it's my view, and you're welcome to challenge it, but we suggest that tier 2 is probably not a very good target, actually. It's going to be quite difficult, probably, for people who are aware of these issues to then start getting them concerned. When you've got 30% of people that we could go for who seem to be currently not even aware of the issue, that seems like it might be an easier task. So with only a few years left to 2020, why not go after that? Similarly on action, well, if we pretend that our task is to get everyone into that tier 5 of doing lots of stuff, high effort behaviours, probably unrealistic. And do we really want to be doing that? Is there an opportunity to think about moving some of those people in tier 3 just into tier 4 of it. We can start having some of these kinds of conversations. I should note just 2 cautions. This is not some kind of customer journey. I'm not suggesting, they've got numbers, we have to refer to them somewhere, but I'm not saying people go through this sequentially. For instance, if you go and find someone who's in tier 1, have a chat with them about the issues, tell the right stories, get them engaged, maybe they'll jump straight into tier 4 or tier 5. That's could be how it works. The second thing is, despite appearances, and I know people will be coming and asking me about this later, this is not a segmentation. The segmentation should give you explanatory power. It should tell you something about the people in these different, in the groups that it talks about, tell them how they think, how to engage and what to do. This is purely descriptive. It's a snapshot of where we are in terms of engagement. And it sets up the further questions. Now, we had some views on these further questions, which I'll be sharing, but other people will have other views, and it's important to, as Ed referred to the smorgasbord, to pull these things together and form your own views. But going back to that, I'd say there are some further questions which Angela also referred to. So, okay, we've got this snapshot, but who are these people? Who are we talking to? Critically, I think, what stories are they already telling to make sense of these issues? We really mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that people, for instance, who are unaware, that means that they're just sort of empty vessels into which we can go out and pour our stories. And just for the sake of getting a debate going, I'm going to just through with one thing that Matt said. He talked about awareness of the term biodiversity increasing and said, well, that's great, and that's a first step. I'm going to just raise a question about that. Biodiversity, I have some issues about that concept, which I will be talking about in the workshop this afternoon. And I think there's a real challenge when we say, well, we need to explain biodiversity to people, what it is and why it matters. That's about taking our concept and trying to change people so that they fit with our concept. If the concept doesn't fit, it's probably easier to change the concepts and the language we use rather than go out and change people. So maybe we should try and find the concepts and the ways of talking about these issues that resonate with people, rather than using the scientific concepts that we have that frankly ain't working. And of course the million-dollar question, what are the new stories then that we can tell that might resonate with and engage people? I'll leave it there. Those are the questions for you, I suppose, to take forward from this.
Thanks.